Hi, I'm Luke. Today on Out of Darts, we are checking out one of the most anticipated releases of the year. This is the Dart Zone Pro Mark III. Let's get going. First, a disclaimer before we get going on this video. This blaster was sent from Dart Zone or their PR company for free. My opinions are ultimately my own. However, anytime someone gets a free product, there's going to be some bias. And I'm also biased with Dart Zone in the first place because I really like their products, I like the brand, and I like how they have listened to our community. That out of the way, let's get right into it. First, a little history on Dart Zone because some of you may be new viewers checking out the channel. Dart Zone is a premium blaster company, or at least they make a premium product at a very affordable price. They came on the scene in 2019 with the Dart Zone Pro Mark I. This was available on their website, high-powered Springer, about $180. They followed that up shortly after with the Nexus Pro, which is $50 at Walmart, really impressive offering. Then they had the Mark II, which is a nice sidearm, also very, very cool blaster, around $80 retail. You can buy them, I believe, at Walmart fairly soon. Another variant of the Nexus, essentially, is the Max Striker. This is available at Target, again, $50. They also have the Conquest Pro. The reason I'm rehashing all of those blasters is because in the Pro line and in their premium offerings, they have been producing phenomenal blasters at a really great value. It's also worth mentioning that Dart Zone produces a bunch of blasters for the Adventure Force line in Walmart, including the newly beloved Spectrum, which has been out for about a year and a half. The Spectrum is a flywheel blaster like the Sryfe, and it really is a solid offering in itself. However, the Mark III is everything the Spectrum is on steroids. Forewarning, this is going to be probably my most thorough review and look at this blaster ever. I've had 3 days where I have done nothing but tear this thing apart and dig inside, look at how it works, look at how it functions, test the performance, get footage, use it in gameplay in a 1v1 situation here in the warehouse, and create a whole mess of mod parts for it right out of the gate. Just to run through the factory specs, this is $129.99. You can buy this both in the US and in Canada. In the US, it is available directly on their website and possibly Target, or that might just be in Canada. In Canada, it's going to be available on Amazon Canada and I believe Target. I might have the Target flip-flopped, so we'll update that with some text here as needed. The Mark III is select fire, it's got full auto, and it's got single semi-automatic, which is pretty fantastic. It's advertised to hit 150 FPS, more on that later, and it includes a digital scope, which is not a true red dot, more on that in a bit, and 2 different magazines, a 15-round short dart and a 15-round full-length magazine. We've got Picatinny rails on top and on the bottom of the muzzle. We've got a buffer tube stock in the back. The included darts are a new type. They are bamboo darts like the original Pro darts, but they have a slightly different triple triangle head here. So far they look to be very, very good, solid glue, solid darts, and they perform very, very well. These neon green and purple-headed darts are exclusive for now for this new release. I do believe there's going to be multi-packs coming. I certainly hope so because they are very, very nice. They are not UV reactive or glow in the dark for those that have asked or questioned whether they are. The first thing you'll notice when you pick up the Mark III is the grip. Right off the bat, it is comfortable. It is comfortable for my adult large size hands. My wife tells me it's comfortable as well, and she has smaller hands. And my 3-year-old also thought it was comfortable, though she just wanted to play with the darts. The grip itself ergonomically feels fantastic, but what really sells it is a TPU rubber overlay that just slides on. It's sort of like a sleeve on the grip of the blaster. It's different than an overmold, so it's not actually connected. You can see here I can actually peel peel this off, and to open up the shell, you'll actually pull the whole sock or grip cover off. The build quality feels quite good. It is significantly larger than a Sryfe, but similar to a Sryfe with a lot of added on parts. In back, we've got a buffer tube style stock with little notches in the bottom, and a miniature buffer tube stock comes with it. Unlike the Mark 1.1, this stock is very solid. The click points lock in very firmly, and in back we again have a nice piece of flexible rubber that's actually making this stick to your clothing or whatever you're shouldering. So this stock in itself is probably one of the better ones they've produced on their different blasters. Even though it is kind of small, I think it's a very nice addition and I like it quite a bit. The buffer tube stock itself also has a nice feature where it properly locks. If you don't pull this little release here, you can simply pull it back and you will get full extension to its longest location, which for me is about what feels right. Now, if you were a little shorter than me or your arms are shorter, you might like the shorter feel, but do know that you can't just take this off and have a stock-free blaster. When I first pulled this little stock cap off, I was almost disappointed because in the Mark III there were O-rings in here, but then I reminded myself it's a Flywheeler, probably no reason to have O-rings inside here, but it was sort of funny to be disappointed about something that's not there. That said, there are a lot of nice surprises in this blaster. As mentioned earlier, we have nice Picatinny style rail up top. We've got Picatinny below the muzzle. We've got a nice foregrip, standard Rev fire trigger, select fire switch, battery door on the left side, which houses 8 AA's, more on that in a bit, and a standard mag release. This release here, of course, releases the full-length magazine, so that can be problematic when you are using short darts. Because of the adapter, you actually want to hit this larger magazine. Now, I am going to offer some solutions for that as well, because it's definitely something that has bugged me initially as you drop the entire magazine out when you only intended to take the mag out, just out of habit, because kind of flicking my middle finger is, that's a weird thing to say. Pushing my middle finger this way is a pretty natural thing to remove a magazine, and it's a hard thing to unlearn once you are trained to do it. The blaster is lacking a sling point altogether. However, it is compatible with our standard buffer tube sling point for the Nexus, and we've got a new one for that coming as well. I do think it's kind of odd that it doesn't have a sling point. It really could have had one right here. Maybe they didn't want to put it there just due to maybe being in the way as you're using it, but maybe it could have been back here. Really feels like it could have had one. However, for whatever reason, they did decide to omit that. Also included is a digital sight, which is not to be confused with a red dot. Now, to the uninitiated, a red dot or holographic sight will actually change the location of the dot based on your perspective looking through the lens. This one is just a fixed point, so it's essentially like a standard iron sight or scope, but it's just got a little nice dot in the middle. Now that said, I think it's kind of a nice little tie-in, and you know, if I was 12 again, this would be super, super cool, and I would be thrilled to have this because it's a nice little add-on. I personally probably won't be using it because I just don't think it's going to help us at all. Given that it doesn't adjust, it's really only a reference point, and I don't really want to look through a window if it's not giving me that added benefit of adjusting for where my head happens to be sitting. The styling on this blaster, in my opinion, is out of this world. I think it's just top-notch design, and it's something that, looking at it, I just love the care and time and effort that's gone into it. I am not a huge fan of this giant muzzle up front, but I expect that's part of making this toy safe, so you cannot get a finger into the flywheels, which ultimately is a safety concern. For modders, I think we're going to see chopped off muzzles from the get-go, and spoiler alert, already working on that. Additionally, these side vents here actually allow airflow into the flywheels, and that in theory would allow for better cooling in the cage if you upgraded this to brushless or something like that. I think that's very, very welcome to have built into the shell from the start. And it's something that I've done on personal blaster designs that I'm working on, because a completely enclosed space like the Sryfe cage is really not ideal for motor operation and longevity. The flywheel cage itself is interesting. It's definitely built quite solidly, and it has a top and bottom half that are very, very rigid. I expect they did this to avoid any flex in the wheels themselves. The cage feels very much like a standard worker ABS cage. I'll show an image of that here just for reference. The wheels themselves are slightly serrated and they are diagonally serrated, and they look to be almost identical to worker wheels that are injection molded. They do seem fairly well balanced, so they are quite decent, but they aren't top-notch, ultimate high-end performance at the end of the day. The cage is oriented vertically just like a standard Sryfe or any other Flywheeler. There was some speculation with the width of this that they might be side to side, but that is not the case. The motors powering that flywheel cage seem to be about as powerful as a set of Valkyries. They are not rare earth magnets like the neodymium high-end motors we sell, so they are probably spec-wise pretty close to a Valkyrie. The cage spacing itself is a little bit hard to determine because of the wheel size being slightly different, but it appears to be about a 42.5 equivalent cage if you were looking at open flywheel project geometry or similar. You can't compare cage spacings directly to something like Daybreak because Daybreak has much larger and concave wheels. Inside, I was thrilled to discover there is 16 gauge wire throughout the entire blaster. There's also a PTC that is tuned to even work with the 3S LiPo on the flywheels themselves, which will reduce the rate of burnout on the motors and ultimately cause Dart Zone less customer service. The 16 gauge wire thing alone kind of blows my mind because, first of all, we're all over-speccing our blasters in the hobby. Even our high-performance motors don't, on paper, technically need 16-gauge wire. 18 would be more than enough. So the fact that they put 16 in there just feels like a wonderful nod to the community and a little, check in that box for modders. I am so happy they went that way. And there's even more surprises. Before you find out the wiring, if you open up this battery tray, you'll see 8 AA's. I unscrewed the battery tray thinking, how can I mod this really, really quickly for the video? And lo and behold, underneath the battery tray is a standard XT60 connector. If that's not a nod and a thank you to the community, I don't know what is. The XT60 connector is dual purpose. It both allows you to take the 2 shells of the blaster apart, leaving the battery tray on the left side of the shell while all the electronics are on the right. You simply disconnect and you can service either side. You also can pull the tray right out and plug in a LiPo and your LiPo alarm. Let me repeat that. The Dart Zone Pro Mark III is 3S LiPo right out of the box. You do nothing. It is incredible. Handling of the blaster is very solid. When you rev up, it's going to sound very similar to a lot of other modded blasters, something like again, maybe not as snappy as a Kraken, but it feels more like a Valkyrie or a Michelle. There's a fairly reasonable amount of vibration, nothing that's unexpected, maybe a little bit more than a Daybreak cage, but definitely less than most stock blasters. The blaster is, of course, select fire, and this is where things get really interesting. I have been speculating for months on how the select fire would work, and it is not even close to what I had guessed. This blaster essentially has 2 different dedicated firing systems that are interwoven together. You've got a standard semi-auto pusher, which works just like a Sryfe. It's got a ratcheting gear system. It's worth noting it is a very snappy, very smooth, crisp trigger pull, one of the better ones I had. It feels a lot smoother than a Sryfe. In addition to being a very smooth trigger pull, it's also full stroke, meaning that every pull moves the entire travel required to fire both a long dart or a short dart. The magic really happens when you figure out how the semi-auto and full auto work. We'll cut some footage in here to try illustrate this a little better, but ultimately when you switch to full auto, you are disengaging part of the mechanical trigger, and the exact same pusher that pushes the full-length darts has teeth, serrated teeth at the front of the pusher, and it slides through a track, and that track, those gears catch the front of that pusher, pushing it down the track, and then you get this effect. My mod tech Greg also tells me that the Colossal Blitz from Boomco also had a very similar firing system with a mechanical and electronic firing system. Now I do want to point out that the rate of fire is quite sluggish. At 2 to 3 rounds a second, it's fairly disappointing to me. I would love to see it a lot faster. I'm going to guess there were some mechanical limitations there ultimately, but I'm going to try sacrifice mine to see how far we can push that if we just simply swap the motor. The sad thing about the full auto being so slow is that I can pull the trigger in semi-faster with fair ease, and that's not even like finger jamming. If I really wanted to go, oh, that mag release. However, I think this is something that could be fixed. There's a fairly complex gearbox in there, and I'm sure one of the concerns is ultimately stripping the blaster. The Mark III, of course, has a standard Rev Trigger. The Rev Trigger is quite comfortable, though I think I'd like to design a trigger that goes all the way up to the top. You can see here, there's kind of this gap here, and I'm not too sure why that's there, but I think it could go up a little bit more because currently my finger does kind of hit the top of that with how I grip the blaster. Now I'm kind of an ergonomics nut job, and I'm really being nitpicky because ergonomically this blaster is a 5 out of 5, hands down. Performance-wise, right out of the box, this thing is delivering the hits. With 8 AA's, it's running at 12 volts nominal, probably running a little bit lower than that under load because a AA can't put out more than about an amp of current, based on my understanding. On full-length darts, I was seeing 160 FPS, and on half, I was seeing about 145. We're gonna put up a whole slew here of footage showing 20-shot averages of a variety of different ammo types and, more importantly, batteries, because with an 8 AA battery tray, you've got options to run nickel metal hydride. You could run IMRs with dummy spacers to get basically 3S with a protected cell, so you're at far lower risk of fire or other issues. And you can, of course, run a 3S LiPo. And then finally, you could run a high voltage 3S LiPo and push these motors just a little bit more. So here you're going to see some of all of our different numbers, some averages, standard deviation, under a variety of different circumstances. We'll try shoot both short and long for all of these because they do perform differently. And for those that aren't aware or haven't heard, the reason that full length will fire farther is that there's more time for the flywheels to contact that dart than when you're using a half-length dart. That said, it's very obvious when you're using this blaster, the half-lengths are flying straighter than the full length, and that is just standard flight characteristics of these two darts. First, we're going to show you full-length dart and half dart on just standard 8 AA fresh alkaline batteries. Next, we're going to run this on 8 high-drain Tenergy nickel metal hydride batteries. These are about the best nickel metal hydrides you can possibly buy. Now we'll test on 3 IMRs and 5 dummy batteries. Now we're going to run the blaster on a 2S LiPo fully charged to 8.4 volts. Next, we're going to run this on a standard 1500 milliamp hour 3S LiPo that's got tons of current available, a 70C pack, and that's running at 12.6 volts when fully charged. Finally, just for kicks, we're going to run this on a high voltage 3S LiPo, which is just a slightly higher voltage per cell. So I believe this one's running at about 13.4 volts or 13.6. We'll put the real voltage on the screen. And here are the feet per second ratings and average along with standard deviation for all of the different battery types. Another really important factor here in the blaster stock configuration is spin-up time. The one downside to using AA's, and I suspect this has something to do with the fire rate too, the flywheels just don't have a lot of time to actually recover between shots. And you can probably hear that if I just reload this quick and fire off some rapid fire full-length darts here. You'll hear the flywheel dip in between. The faster you get going on fire rate, the more wear you're going to put on your motors, the more stress it's going to put on the motors, and the less time they will have to recover between shots. So one interesting thing I wanted to test is how fast does this spin up with various different ammo types. So we're going to start on the baseline, which is 8 AA's. These are alkaline batteries. They were opened fresh just for this review. Next, we're going to test the spin up time on 8 nickel metal hydride batteries. Again, these are those high drain, high capacity Tenergy cells. In my opinion, they're one of the best ones out there. Now we'll test on 3 IMRs and 5 dummy batteries. Sounds like I can do math right. That's basically a 3S. Now we'll check it on a 2S. Note that the RPM it's going to hit is going to be lower. Now we'll test it on a high power 3S LiPo. This is probably the ideal setup for competitive or serious play with this blaster. Finally, we'll again test the spin up time on the high voltage LiPo, which shouldn't spin up any faster, but it's going to go to a slightly higher RPM because of that extra 10% or so voltage. And here you can see the results all together in one place. Moving on to magazines, the blaster works well with just about every magazine except one really important one. You can take a drum. Worker magazines will of course work. Even the curved magazines from Nerf will work. The standard Nerf 18s, of course, will work. And a cute little shorty 6-round. Yeah, that's cute. The magazines from the Nexus, of course, will work. And even a katana from Jet will work. Our in-house Tachi magazines, 29-round capacity, they will of course function very well. Here we've got the 15-round magazine from the original Dart Zone Pro Mark 1.1 with its adapter, not with the new adapter. And that one is not compatible. I do believe they've mentioned that on the site, and that's one of the reasons they're actually clearancing those on their website as well. When it comes to Talon mags, unfortunately, I've got some bad news. We have tested extensively over the weekend trying to figure out what's going on with the Talon mags, but they do not feed reliably in either full auto or in semi-auto. I reached out to Dart Zone but did not get a comment back yet. If we have any update, I will certainly put that on the screen here. We will have a couple days until we'll post this. We might have a chance to get a response from them. Essentially what's happening is when you put a Talon mag in that's fully loaded to 15, what's happening there is that the first dart is getting fired, and then as the pusher comes back, it's pulling the second dart back into the system, which then jams the pusher in the forward position. When the pusher is in the forward position, even in semi-automatic, the blaster will keep revving. Now, these are the bamboo darts, so they're very similar, but they do have a different head. And at that point, we're just totally jammed up until we pull the magazine out. And there you can see it actually pulled that dart backwards. We have tested this with the Max Striker darts in the Talon magazines. Additionally, we've tested this with the angled magazines and the 18-round Talon magazines. We've also tested every variation of worker adapter. We've tested the Dart Zone included adapter and basically every combination that exists. It happens with all dart types, including the darts that come with the blaster. This leads me to be fairly confused because the mag adapter that does come with the blaster has a catch specifically for Talons. It has no other purpose but to be there for Talons. At first we weren't quite sure what was going on here, but my buddy Brett, also a guy who sometimes wears a beret, came by over the weekend and we spent several hours going through all of the possible combinations. It's worth noting he has his own blaster and the same issues are reproducible identically on both blasters. There are two things I think at play here. The first is the shape of the dart lip and the amount of friction it takes to push a dart forward or backwards. On the Talons, it seems like there's less friction to physically move a dart, but it very much depends on how loaded the magazine is. The next thing I think it may be is that the pressure of the spring is higher on a Talon magazine than on the Dart Zone magazines. It's one of the reasons the Talons will feed faster in a higher rate of fire blaster. We were also able to reproduce the issue on the Tachi, however, it only is present in the high rate of fire spring, which is really kind of a ridiculous spring to fire 25 rounds a second. If you use the standard 6 to 8 rounds a second spring, the low rate of fire, there's no issues with the blaster whatsoever. So I am happy to say that Tachi is 100% compatible. Where does this leave us as far as magazines? Pretty disappointed. I think the first thing I'm going to try is to see if there's not a fix we can do to block the dart from coming back. So do subscribe. In the next video, if I figure out a solution, we'll be talking about that next week. The other thing I think that we could play with is simply clipping the springs at the bottom to see if reducing the pressure helps, but I'm not sure that's it either, because it doesn't necessarily seem like less pressure would be the solution, because it's instead pulling the dart back. You'd almost think more pressure would make that less likely. I think a big part of it is the shape of the pusher being slanted is making sure that those two dart heads don't touch each other, so there's not very much friction as this comes back. And as that slanted pusher pushes this down, we're getting the tip of the pusher catching the dart and then pulling the dart back into the firing system. Again, I can show you that with a completely different adapter just for fun. We'll slap this in here, and let's even do full auto. We'll change all kinds of variables. Well, that time we didn't even fire, so that's a problem. That one doesn't like me at all. So we're gonna switch adapters, and we'll go to the forward-facing Talon adapter. And it's the same thing, I'm catching things on the return. So overall, the mag compatibility is pretty disappointed, because this is definitely the hobby standard. And certainly this will be factored into my review, because for the hobby side, these are still pretty important and very, very popular. And if you've got a loadout of 10 or 12, a dozen of these things, it's gonna be hard to switch over when you have to purchase all new magazines. Another really big gripe I have with the firing system is that the full auto system is first very, very slow. But second, the bigger problem is that it frequently does a double fire when using full length darts. Now, in our extensive testing, we have not seen this issue with short darts at all. So it's not a problem with short darts, but when you're using full lengths, you get some of this action going on. So I'm into full auto here. I'm just gonna hold down the trigger for the whole magazine. That first magazine was a magazine of the Max Striker darts from Target. Next, I'm going to use the included darts that come with the blaster. It's actually doing it even more consistently. It's almost like the issue's getting worse over time. And then here I've got a worker mag that's full of AF Pro darts. So what you're probably hearing there is single fire, double, double, single fire, double, double, single, it's kind of bouncing around. And I think again here, it's that sloped pusher is causing issues. It happens with all long dart types, regardless of brand or magazine. It's not the worst thing in the world, but ideally it would shoot a consistent rate of fire. I do feel like it's gotten worse over time, and it is present on, again, both my blaster and Brett's blaster. The only disclaimer I can make is perhaps these are pre-production models, but it is my understanding that these are retail, so it's hard to say anything about that. Again, if we have anything from Dart Zone on this, we'll update. But what I think is happening is that sloped pusher is pushing the first dart, and then it's managing, as that gets through, the slope pusher pushes the second dart just enough to get it into the flywheels, and both darts get fired. Again, this happened with both blasters right out of the box. Standard alkaline batteries, the included magazine, the included darts, and every other dart type we tested. For me, this really isn't a deal breaker. It's not great, that's for sure, but I don't really care about long darts. Short darts are definitely the way, so the Talon thing is definitely more of an issue. In the end, my thoughts on this blaster are overwhelmingly positive, but I do have a few minor gripes. The first is this front muzzle. It is really massive. I think when you're running around, you're likely to hit this on objects when you're doing anything that's closer quarters. Certainly for long distance engagements, it's not going to be a problem, but there are times when I really like to tuck up into a bunker as tight as possible, and this is definitely one of those things that can be fixed. One good thing about the muzzle, however, is that it's not glued, it simply drops in place, so pretty simple to design a replacement, and I've already started work on that. The Rev Trigger itself is pretty basic. It's just kind of a straight button. I think it could use a little bit more imagination, and I'd like to do something about that as well. The digital scope is another complaint. I don't think it adds a lot of value, and I personally would have rather seen a slightly lower price point, even if it was by $5 or $10. However, I definitely can see that some consumers, and kids especially, will enjoy the sort of fake faux red dot sight. Next thing I wanted to go over is the XT60 battery connector that's inside. Now, as we mentioned, there is a amazing XT60 in here ready for you to just plug in your blaster, and you do have to take the batteries out. There's one screw underneath the battery tray, and once you've done that, you get to your XT60. Now, you can plug in any 3S LiPo right out of the box, which is pretty fabulous. And in our FPS chart, we'll show the different performances. But one of the issues is that none of the 3S LiPos I have, I carry about 15 different LiPos, and none of them actually fit this battery tray. This smallest 950 graphene is simply too wide to fit inside here. So while it was designed with a LiPo in mind, it definitely wasn't designed with any LiPo I've got. We will be looking to both source a LiPo that does fit properly inside this battery tray, and we will, of course, make an extended battery tray just like we did for the Sryfe. It's a shame to take out this beautiful styling, so I think I'll match this something similar, but essentially even the smallest one we've got still is about 5-6 millimeters too wide. There probably are some LiPos out there we could swap this out with, so we'll play around with that and definitely have recommendations in the future, but know that pretty much all of your existing LiPos they'll work out of the box, but you're not getting this battery door back on, so keep that in mind. One really important thing to talk about here is who this blaster is for. At $130, I think it's definitely aimed at a brand new person getting into the hobby or who wants a performance blaster to shoot around their house or their yard with their friends, but doesn't want to either spend more money or put a blaster together themselves. When you look at this at $130, it really compares to a fairly basic LiPo mod on either a Sryfe or on the Spectrum. For about $50 of components, maybe $60, you can buy everything you need to get this to shoot just as well as this, if not better. So for less money, you essentially could end up with either of these blasters tricked out with all of the components you could want, including extra 3D bits, cage, flywheels, LiPo, and you'd still come under the price point. So the Mark III, in my opinion, is really tailored to somebody who likes this shell and likes the design, which in my opinion is awesome. I love it. I think it's super beautiful. The grip is very, very comfortable, but probably B, doesn't want to do the modding side as much themselves. Now that said, I'm going to do a ton of mod parts for this because I love the shell. I think it's very comfortable and it's a nice blaster. There's a lot of potential, and I think it's going to be a very, very popular platform. But it does come at a pretty big premium, and if you're paying $130 and then immediately go out and upgrade the cage, wiring, and motors, you're kind of throwing away some of the value that came in the blaster. Though, one tip would be put those in another blaster that you mod yourself for a friend or for a kid or something else. So don't just get rid of the motors, because the motors in here, they are at least about Valkyrie power, pretty solid. At the end of the day, I think this is a really solid blaster, but it is far from perfect. I'm going to give this one a split rating. I think for the newcomer to the hobby, it's a 4 out of 5 stars. There's some little quirks here and there. It's almost a 5-star, but there's definitely some feeding issues, some compatibility issues. But someone that's new to modding and shooting blasters, they're not going to really care about whether Talon mags work or not. So that detractor kind of set aside, I think this is a pretty good offering at $130 for someone that's newer in the hobby. It comes with a lot of accessories. You get kind of a nice ready-to-go package that's very versatile right out of the box, and that can't be overstated enough ultimately. On the modding side of things, this is really going to depend on you. I mean, for me, I still feel like it almost deserves a 4, but I would say it's more of a 3 out of 5. And we've got multiple issues happening there. First, the Talon mags don't work. Second, the performance for the hobby is still a little on the low side. It's something that a lot of people are still going to upgrade the cage and wheels. But if you like the shell, you like the look of it and the feel of it, because it is a great blaster, very comfortable, then I lean more towards a 4 or even higher. But some of those feed issues, the full auto being very sluggish, are some major detractors on the kind of modder side and aggressive play side of the game, and people that want to play more kind of pro style games and competitive leagues. I will be very interested to see whether some of these issues get ironed out or can be fixed. I'm certainly going to try fix some of them myself if I can, and I will wait to hear what Dartzone says about it as well. Thank you so much for watching. This was obviously a long one. If you hung on this far, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you watching. We had a lot of fun over the last week or so working on this and designing like crazy. We'll have another whole video on designs and stuff. I didn't want to make this video about upgrading. I wanted to make this a strict just a review on the blaster itself. So our next video will probably be either the mod guide, or it'll be all of the kind of a spotlight of all the things that I've changed or fixed and the technical deep dive. So subscribe for more. Until next time, I'm out of darts.
I need some ammo.
Oh no, I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm out of darts.
Yeah, you are.